Boldwood presents Kilts and Kisses at Highland Hall, written by Lynn and read by Rosalind Steele. Chapter 1. Nigel clicked the end of his pen. On, then off, on, then off, on and off. If he did it one more time, Bex was going to grab it from his hand and throw it out of their 7th floor office window. Or at least that was what she would have liked to do. She wouldn't do that because Nigel was her boss, and despite her being the most valuable person on the accounting team, his words, not hers, she suspected he wouldn't take too kindly to it. Still, that incessant clicking noise was making her nervous, and there was no need for her to be nervous, was there? Of course not. The firm was expanding, not downsizing, and even if it had been, she would be no way near the top of the redundancy list. So why had Nigel called her into his office with such formality this morning, and why was he having such a hard time spitting his words out? In her heart, she knew there could only be one reason. A very, very positive one. As she waited for him to put the pen down, or at least stop clicking it long enough to say something to her, she regretted her decision to take a seat. Her knee was bouncing up and down as she tried to act calm and composed, nonchalant even, like she hadn't seen this day coming for years, like she hadn't been working her butt off for this promotion since she first took the job here. There would be bubbles with the girls tonight, that was for sure. Screw the fact it was Monday. She was going to be an associate director. As soon as Nigel found his damn voice. Finally, with a sharp breath in, Nigel gave the pen one last click before placing it down on the desk in front of him. I want you to know that what I'm about to ask of you is a great compliment, he said. As butterflies swarmed in Bex's stomach, she tried to keep her expression neutral. Like she hadn't been expecting this. For 10 years she'd been working at the same accountancy firm, and she had done more than her fair share of grunt work. As a manager, she had been given the most difficult team to lead and the most difficult clients to handle. She had attended every workplace bonding retreat and voluntary staff training the firm had offered, and sacrificed more hours than anyone could have dreamt, and it had all been leading up to this point. Associate Director. That was the role Nigel was about to tell her she had got. The role she deserved. I want you to know that I won't let you down, she replied, trying to suppress the grin rising on her lips. I know, Rebecca. I can assure you that I thought very hard about the right person for this position, and what it came down to was that I needed someone I could trust. I needed someone completely professional, who always puts the job first, who can work under pressure and in difficult situations, and I mean this truthfully when I say there was only one person I knew would fit that bill. He paused and smiled slightly. And you're that person, he added, as if she hadn't got that bit. Thank you, Nigel. That means a lot to me. Again, a silence filled the air. Bex's heart was pounding so forcefully she could feel the blood rushing behind her ears. Why wouldn't he just say it? He wanted her to be the new associate director. It really wasn't that hard to say, was it? She cleared her throat, wondering if perhaps she should say something more, like how she was sure they would make a great team and how the vision of the firm would always be at the forefront of what she did. Yet, as she opened her mouth to speak, Nigel picked up the pen, clicked it once more, and looked at her with an almost apologetic expression on his face. I need you to go to Scotland, he said. Sorry? She said, sure she must have misheard him. Scotland, he repeated. I need you to go to Scotland for 2 months. Chapter 2. You have to be joking. Scotland for 2 months? Why? Bex had gone straight from the office to Wildflower Loch to visit her friend Daisy on her narrowboat. She'd sent a single message before she left. have drink ready, and Daisy had clearly taken note as a variety of wines were now open on the table in front of them. Bex had also called their other friend, Claire, to say that she was needed too, and now the three of them were sitting together on the boat, jaws hanging loose as Bex relayed the meeting to them. I mean, the good thing is, if I do this, then apparently I can choose whatever jobs I want from now on, and I assume that means the associate director role. But why do you have to go? Claire said. Surely you would have to apply for a job like this. You can't just be sent there. Bex pursed her lips. This wasn't like in the office with Nigel, where she had to bite her tongue and appear appreciative and say she was grateful for the opportunity. She was here with her friends. She could tell them the truth. I'm single, she said with a shrug, meaning, from the firm's point of view, I don't have anyone who'll miss me when I'm up there for 2 months. The anger that flashed across her friends' faces was the exact confirmation she had needed that it was okay to be furious at the situation. What? That is not true! Did he say that? That's discrimination. She was grateful for how riled her friends had become on her behalf. Unfortunately, it didn't change the situation. Of course he didn't say it like that, Bex said. He used the word committed a lot. Other people had personal commitments, family commitments. I don't. God, there's nothing like being reminded how painfully single you are than being sent hundreds of miles away because no one will miss you. We'll miss you! Daisy and Claire spoke in unison, and for the first time since she'd received the news, Bex felt a flutter of warmth fill her. She smiled weakly. I know, but it's not quite the same. And what about your flat? You have a home here. I know, but apparently there's enough accommodation at this place that I won't need to pay rent, so I won't lose out financially. It's just frustrating, you know? She let out a long groan. I'm not wrong to be annoyed by this, am I? She said, trying to keep the focus on her initial grievances rather than being sidetracked by the reminder of her perpetually single relationship status. But it was difficult, given how intertwined the two were. I get that I can't keep a relationship going for more than 2 months, but that doesn't mean I don't have a life. I don't want to just pack everything up and move there. But I can't complain about it because, generally speaking, Nigel's great, and I actually think he believes he's doing me a favour by giving me this position. Besides, he's right. I am the one without commitments. A deep aching sat heavily in her chest. She'd always thought that playing the field was a sensible thing to do, that waiting until Mr. Perfect finally showed up would be the key to having the perfect ever-after marriage, like her parents had. But her last 4 relationships had lasted less than 3 months each, and here she was, over a year older, feeling no closer to finding that happily ever after. You just need to think of it as an adventure, Daisy said, bringing Bex out of her thoughts. There are some beautiful areas up in Scotland, all the islands and things, and you won't be working all the time, will you? You'll have time to get out and explore. You haven't actually told us what you're needed to do up there, Claire said before Bex could respond. Why do you need to be up there? It's some friend of Nigel's dad, she said, though the thought alone was enough to worry her. Nigel was in his late 50s, so she could only imagine what this man was like. Apparently he's got a large estate, with land and various businesses and things, but he hasn't done a great job of keeping on top of all his accounts. It sounds like he's still stuck in the days of paper and wants someone to go up there and sort it all out, digitalise it, that kind of thing. It's more bookkeeping than accounting. Not my area of expertise at all. Well, it was beneath her area of expertise. That was what she actually wanted to say, but she kept that to herself, just like she had done in the meeting with Nigel. That's all I know. I mean, I'm hoping it'll take less time than Nigel thinks, but I won't know until I get there. And I got the feeling that Nigel expects me to stay up there the full 2 months, Or longer than that if that's how long it takes. If I want the promotion, that is." Silence fell among the girls, and Bex reached for her drink, only to find the glass was empty. She'd Googled the place Nigel was sending her, and it seemed to be a little village in the middle of nowhere. The chances of them having a decent wine shop felt next to nothing. She would need to stock up. "You never know," Daisy said. "Maybe you'll find your Scottish Prince Charming up there. I have always liked a man in a kilt." Bex arched an eyebrow. "Let's make one thing clear. I have zero need for a prince, and my one aim is to get the job over and done with as quickly as possible. But I'll be sure to let Theo know about the kilt thing when he gets back." As the girls chuckled, Bex's mind drifted back to thoughts of the next 2 months. Maybe Daisy was right. Maybe she could turn this into an adventure. And what was the worst-case scenario? If she hated the place, then she could lose herself in the work, get it sorted as quickly as possible, then come back to London to the promotion she'd been working her butt off for, and her friends would still be waiting for her. She would do this. She would go to Scotland and do what had been asked of her. After all, it wasn't like she had a choice. Chapter 3. "How long have you got left to go?" Claire said, her voice tiny through the car's speaker system. "You must be nearly there now." 3 hours, Bex replied with a groan. "Remind me again why I decided to drive rather than fly." She already knew the answer, of course. If she was going to be in the middle of nowhere, away from tubes and taxis, not to mention everything she loved about London life, then she needed her car to get around. Unfortunately, that meant an 11-hour drive. She had done half of it the day before and had planned on getting up early to finish off the remaining 5 hours, but then she had overslept. There had been roadworks and diversions, and for the first 3 hours of the journey, the time on her sat-nav kept going up rather than down. Now it was already gone 3 in the afternoon, but at least she had passed Glasgow and was on the narrow country lanes, finally feeling like she was making decent progress. Besides, the long summer evenings meant there were still hours of daylight ahead of her. "I've been researching the village where this house is." Daisy's voice took over on the phone. "It looks lovely. Very posh. They hold clay pigeon shoots and country balls, that type of thing." "Well, I'm sure that's lovely for the people who live there. I, however, will not have time to do anything other than pretend I'm a bookkeeper for the next 2 months. Honestly, the more I think about it, the madder I get. But at least it's pretty. Very pretty." Pretty was probably the biggest understatement for what she was seeing. It was stunning. Breathtaking, even. Whichever window she looked out of, all she could see was miles and miles of constantly changing greenery stretching out in every direction. One moment she was driving through undulating hills, the next it was long tundra-like plains, and only a couple of miles later the green had been replaced entirely by the sight of the sea, pale blue and glinting with sunlight off in the distance. "That's not the only thing," Daisy continued. "The place you're staying at, you said it was called Highland Hall, right?" "That's right. Why?" "Well, I looked that up too, and—" "What the hell?" Bex slammed on the brakes. Her pulse soared as the car skidded on the stony road and came to a stop only half a foot away from disaster. "Bex, is everything okay? Has something happened?" Even though Bex could hear the worry in her friends' voices, she couldn't reply straight away. Her pulse was still sky-high, and she needed to catch her breath. Slowly, she loosened her grip on the steering wheel and managed to choke out an answer. "Sheep," she said. "Lots and lots of sheep." Never before had Bex known sheep to put her in such a foul mood. Normally, the only time she saw them were out of the windows of trains or in the fields around Wildflower Loch, and she loved to watch the little bouncing lambs leaping around without a care in the world. But these sheep weren't in a field. They were on the road, and rather than leaping, they were trudging forwards as if they were completely oblivious to the fact that this was a road with traffic on and people in cars who needed to be somewhere. After apologising to the girls for scaring them, then opening up the camera so they could see what she was having to face, Bex hung up the phone and got out of the car in search of any sign of a farmer or someone she could yell at. But if there was someone there, she couldn't see them. So she returned to her vehicle, flicked her audiobook on, and tried not to get any more wound up at the massive inconvenience. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, the sheep filtered off the road and into one of the fields. "Okay, time to make up some of that lost time," Bex said, pushing her foot down on the accelerator. After her flat, her car was her biggest purchase, and she had spent even longer choosing it. She had wanted something sporty and sleek, but which also had enough space to take all the girls, including Claire's daughter, away for the weekends. And so she had finally picked a 4-door coupe that ticked all those boxes. Unfortunately, as she weaved down a gently sloping hill and saw a sign at the side of the road, she realised there was one criterion that she definitely hadn't considered when choosing a car. "Someone, somewhere, is having a very big laugh at my expense," she said, as she cut the engine, climbed out of the car and walked a little way down the road. Her stomach plummeted at the sight in front of her. Of course Bex had heard of Fords before. She was an intelligent woman. She had probably driven through one or two of them with her parents when they had gone on holiday to the Cotswolds. But she had never driven through one herself, and certainly not in her own car. Her own expensive, low-to-the-ground car. She looked at the body of water in front of her. It was slow-flowing, but definitely flowing. A river, not a puddle, and probably around 10 feet wide. Though it didn't matter how wide it was. What mattered was how deep it was, and that wasn't something she could tell. "Marvellous. Just bloody marvellous," she said as she turned around, shaking her head. Back in the car, she checked the sat-nav to see if there were any other routes, and when one appeared, her chest lightened with relief until she noticed that it added another 2 hours to the journey. 2 hours. And what if there was another Ford on that route too? She would find herself in exactly the same position. But then, if she flooded the car, she would be in even more trouble. What she needed was some way to work out exactly how deep the water was without risking the car, which meant there was only one thing she could do. Chapter 4. "You are going to pay for this, Nigel." Bex was talking to herself through gritted teeth, partially because of how angry she was, but mostly because the water was bloody freezing. She had rolled up her jeans, grabbed a towel from her bag, and walked over to the edge of the ford, at which point she had removed her shoes. She'd initially planned on only going halfway, reasoning that would give her the best indication of how deep it got, but then she also figured there could be some hidden pothole near the other side. It would be a far wiser approach to go all the way across on one side, then back on the other, hopefully gauging where the wheels would drive. It may have been summer, but the water didn't seem to know that, and every step was painfully cold. Still, she made it to the far side unscathed before turning around and heading back. By the time she was at her car, drying off her feet, her entire body was covered in goosebumps, even though she had only got wet up to mid-calf, which meant, thankfully, that the ford was shallow enough for the car to get through. Even though she knew there should be no issues driving through the shallow water, it didn't stop Bex from holding her breath the entire time. One way or another, she was going to find a way of billing this journey as extra expenses beyond the petrol. Never could she remember having a drive that had left her so fraught. And so much for thinking she was going to pop out for weekends and visit local places. If this was what it was like trying to get to Highland Hall, then she would stay there until the job was done. Her details from Nigel had told her that Highland Hall was on the outskirts of a village called Loch, about which Bex had done zero research. That wasn't her normal style of things. Normally, she liked to do as much research on one of her clients as she could, but normally she wasn't thrust into living with them, and she had enough to deal with, packing up and coming here to bother scouting out all the tourist traps. She was a city girl through and through, and as such, Loch was not somewhere she could imagine liking. Still, as she drove past the little sign with Loch written on the side, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of guilt for already disliking a place she had never even been, especially a place that was so unequivocally beautiful. It could have had something to do with the way the sunlight was glinting off the white painted houses, or the contrast between the dark slate tiles and the pale sky. Or maybe it was the mix of stones that the buildings were made of, which combined so perfectly with the rugged landscape and lush green grasses. But whatever the reason, as Bex drove slowly through the village, she found herself drinking it all in. The place that was to be her home for the next 2 months. Relief billowed through her as she noticed 2 pubs, at least 1 cafe, and a restaurant too, although only 1 small shop. The chances of getting a supermarket delivery here seemed unlikely, but she could cope with eating out. She'd bill it to the firm anyway. After this journey, that was the least she deserved. As she followed the directions on her sat-nav, she moved away from the village, passing through a stone lodge gate and on to a gravel driveway. In her mind, she had created a very loose image of Highland Hall. Given that the village was called Loch, it felt likely that the house would have a view out over the water, and if it had room for her to stay there, it was probably fairly sizable. But beyond that, she wasn't sure what else to expect. As strange as it might have sounded to Daisy or Claire, she hadn't wanted to look it up. She had been feeling bad enough about having to do this move as it was. The last thing she needed was to see the grey and sombre building she was going to be trapped in for the next 8 weeks. Yet, as the driveway continued, with thick cedar trees marking either side of the route, her nervousness flickered up a notch. This wasn't the driveway of an average house, or even a larger-than-average house. In fact, she had visited stately homes that had smaller driveways than this. But maybe it was just a Scottish thing? Maybe having all this land meant people liked to spread out more. That was what Bex was thinking when the trees finally gave way to a wide open driveway. The moment she looked up, one of her hands flew up to her mouth and the nerves in her stomach gave way to a full-on somersault. "It's a castle," she said, struggling to take in the building in front of her. "It's an actual castle!" Chapter 5. The car crawled so slowly forward it was barely moving, but Bex didn't want to go any faster. She wanted to take it all in. It was difficult to tell exactly how many turrets the castle had, maybe 4 or 5, but it also had a moat, round walls, and a wooden door so large you could have fit an elephant through it. But as phenomenal as the building was, so were the grounds. From the angle Bex was sitting at, she couldn't see any sign of the water, but trees and flowers of all shapes, sizes and colours filled the landscape. Bex had never really been into her flora and fauna growing up, though over recent years she had spent a substantial amount of time at Wildflower Loch, and Daisy's enthusiasm for all the blooms that grew around her had started to spread. As soon as she got out of the car, she'd need to get photos of these, she thought, and send them to Daisy. Though no sooner had the thought formed than her eyes scrunched closed, and she let out a long yawn. Why was driving so damn tiring? She had overslept that morning because the 5 hours on the road yesterday had taken it out of her. Today was even longer. What she needed was to get a very early night, But before she could do that, she would need to find someone called Fergus. Nigel had told her that Fergus would be her go-to for everything at Highland Hall, though he hadn't actually explained to Bex what his job was. A groundsman? Another accountant? In a castle like this, he could well be the butler. As soon as she had got her things, she would hunt him down. There was only one car in front of the house, a large forest green Land Rover, covered in mud. There had to be another place to park, Bex thought as she drew her car up next to it. After all, a place this size had to be home to a blooming big family, and then there were the staff you'd need to look after everything. She would find where the rest of them parked tomorrow. For now, she just wanted to get in, find this Fergus, and get to bed. Deciding to leave her large suitcase where it was, she got out of the car. Bex had been to Edinburgh before, and given that the trip had been in August, she'd packed for summer weather back then. Strappy dresses, denim shorts, flip-flops and sandals, that type of thing. What she'd faced was biting, ferocious winds and a complete lack of any suitable outfits. She hadn't made that mistake this time. Although all she carried with her now was a small bag with a clean change of clothes, pyjamas, wash bag and her computer. She approached the door, fist raised, ready to knock, yet before she could move her hand, a thundering sound caused her to turn her head. Her stomach flipped at the sight. 5 dogs were racing towards her, sprinting with such speed it was like they were a pack about to attack. She turned around, searching for some way to escape them, but there was nowhere to go. And there was no mistaking it now. They were heading straight for her. Did they think she had trespassed on their land? Were they guard dogs trained to attack any intruder? If that was the case, what were they going to do to her? "Don't let them know you're afraid," she whispered to herself. "They mustn't know you're afraid." She had heard that dogs sensed fear, but telling herself not to be scared and actually not being scared were very different things. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing against the pain she was sure was about to strike. But when a sensation finally reached her, it wasn't teeth at all, but a wet, slobbering tongue. She opened her eyes, only to be knocked back as one of the largest dogs jumped up at her, licking her chin. In seconds, she was surrounded by wagging tails and slobbering jaws. With relief flooding through her, she straightened up and finally saw behind the wall of dogs to the old man walking towards her. He was dressed to camouflage perfectly into the scenery, a wax jacket, green flat cap, and wooden walking stick. "Hello," she said, waving her hand at him. Although whether he didn't see or simply didn't care, she didn't know. He made no attempt to respond, other than by continuing to walk towards her. His bedraggled hair was sticking out at odd angles beneath his flat cap, and his face wore the beard of a man who had simply lost any desire to shave. The laces of his boots were frayed and untied, and while she suspected it was a green wax jacket he was wearing, it was difficult to tell under the layers of mud. This was not the type of man who had decided to grow old with grace. The groundskeeper, possibly, she thought. Or perhaps some local homeless man who had come to the castle looking for handouts. Although his dogs looked remarkably healthy and well. Groundskeeper, then, most likely. She had seen enough period television programmes to know how wealthy families would keep on old and often incapable workers just because they felt guilty about letting them go. That was obviously the case here. Bex stood up straight. Having given her a terrifying welcome, most of the dogs had disappeared, but one, a red Labrador, had sat down at her side and was continuing to beat its tail on the ground. "Sorry," she said. "I'm Bex, Rebecca Barker. I've been told I need to find Fergus." "Aye, I know who you are. Been expecting you." The man walked up to the large door, turned the handle and pushed it open. Bex raised an eyebrow. She'd never leave her London flat without checking the doors were double locked, and yet this entire castle was open to walk into. Of course, there were probably plenty of people inside who would spot an intruder before they took too much, but it still seemed like an unnecessary risk to take. "Have you eaten?" the man asked, standing at the open door. I had a sandwich a couple of hours ago." "Aye or nay? Do you need food?" Bex cleared her throat. No. To be honest, I'm pretty tired, actually. I could do with a bath and bed." "All right, well, I'll show you to your room then." "No, how was your journey, or have you been here before?" He clearly wasn't one for small talk, although, to be fair, she wasn't much in the mood for it either. As the old man moved inside, Bex followed, and immediately she felt all the air escape her lungs. "This place is huge," she said. She'd seen it from the outside, of course, and already knew it was massive, but seeing it like this, the wide open hall, the vaulted ceilings and the 2 staircases she could see from where she was standing, was giving her an entirely different perspective. It was colossal. Bex took a second to look around her, casting her eyes over the heavy tapestries that hung from the walls, dulled with dust. She thought all buildings like this had been turned into hotels or open to the public as stately homes to visit, but this place had none of the ambience of a hotel or a stately home. That wasn't to say it wasn't stunning. It was absolutely beautiful, and she could only imagine how it would come to life when it was filled with people, those high society functions of years gone by. But it felt like it was missing something now. "Well, don't dilly-dally. Are you coming or not?" The man was now over by one of the staircases, all but one of his pack of dogs close on his heels. That last one was that same red Labrador, and it was sticking unusually close to Bex, as if she, and not the man, were its owner. "Sorry," she said, picking up her pace to catch up with him. "How many people live in this house?" "Well, Horace still comes up twice a week, sometimes more. And young Duncan, well, it seems like he spends more time here than in his bloody lodge. But mostly it's just me." "You?" "Aye, me. And the dogs, of course." The entire situation was growing more and more confusing. So, the groundskeeper lived in the main castle? Where the hell were the owners? "Sorry," Bex said, trying her best to sound polite, "but I didn't even catch your name, or your role here. Who are you?" The old man frowned. His already crinkled face crumpled up like a piece of washing that had been forgotten at the bottom of the basket. "I'm Fergus, Laird of Loch. Who the hell did you think I was?" Bex swallowed a lump in her throat. There was no way she could answer that question. Telling the laird of this great Scottish castle, who also held all her future career prospects in his hands, that she'd thought he was a homeless person, or at best a very scruffy groundskeeper, didn't seem like a great way to make an impression. "I was just confirming, that's all. It's been a long drive," she added, smiling broadly, though it did little to alleviate the glower on the old man's face. "Humph," he grunted, before turning around and making his way up the stairs. "Your room is just up here, and you'll want a good night's sleep. You got a fair heft of work ahead." Chapter 6. Bex tried to stay on Fergus's heels as he made his way up to the second floor and into the maze of corridors that weaved through the castle, but it was hard not to get distracted. There was just so much to look at. Massive oil paintings depicting images of the rugged Scottish Highlands were interspersed with ornately gilded mirrors, small portraits, and countless vases stacked on intricately carved wooden tables. Fingers crossed he had an inventory of all this stuff for the insurers somewhere that she could use for the accounts, because she had no idea what all this would be worth. They were a third of the way down the corridor when Fergus stopped by one of the large wooden doors. "Well, this'll be you," he said gruffly. "There's an electric shower in there. No point having the water heating on for the whole place when it's just us here. If it gets a bit dry, there's an electric blanket. I know how you southern folks struggle." Bex was only half listening, and even from the part she'd heard, she wasn't sure she understood. Dry? Cold, maybe? That would make sense in the context. Still, she didn't ask for clarification. She was too busy staring at the room Fergus had just told her she would be staying in. It was difficult not to gawp, given that it looked like she had just stepped onto the set of Downton Abbey, or maybe the Tudors. The space alone was as big as the entire kitchen, dining and living area of her London flat, and the windows had to be at least 7 feet tall as they let in the orange-hued evening light. There were heavy red curtains, a marble fireplace and, of course, a massive 4-poster bed, complete with sheer drapes around it. This wasn't the type of room you let your accountant sleep in when they were up here on business. This was the type of room royalty stayed in, and given the number of doors they had passed, and the fact that they were on the 2nd floor, it made her think that there were plenty more rooms like this. But Fergus said he lived here alone. That didn't make sense. "Sorry, did you say you lived here on your own?" Bex asked, sure she must have got the wrong end of the stick. "Like I said, sometimes I get the laddie from the lodge who comes up here a bit, uses this room when the water acts up, and I've got a nephew, Kieran. He comes sometimes too, likes to use the place for his shoot days." "Shoot days?" Bex said, vaguely recalling Daisy mentioning something like that when she had been driving. "Aye, shoots. Comes up with his friends from London. I hide myself away, but I didn't expect you'll be seeing much of him. I've got Nora too. She comes in and does the cleaning for me 3 times a week, so you'll probably see her, but it's best to stay out of her way. She's got enough to do without you making even more mess for her." "So you and the dogs live here alone?" she said, now certain she had understood that was what he was telling her, just unsure how that was possible. The old man tilted his head to the side. "That's what I said, isn't it? Hope you're better with numbers than with words." Bex wasn't sure how she was supposed to reply to that, but as it happened, she didn't need to, as Fergus carried on speaking. "I'll have plenty to be getting on with in the morning, so I don't expect to see you first thing. But the study is down the stairs. You'll find the paperwork and things in there. Get yourself started." With that, he turned around and left, 4 of his 5 dogs trotting after him. The one that remained was the same red Labrador as before. Oblivious to Bex until now, said dog had snuck across the room and jumped into the armchair, where she was curled up and feeling most comfortable. Bex was about to tell her that she probably needed to leave when Fergus reappeared in the room. "Seems like Ruby's taken a liking to you," he said, before his gaze narrowed on his dog. "You can stay if you like, but this one's got no idea where your food is, so you come in." The dog looked between Bex and Fergus as if it was genuinely considering her options, before she leisurely climbed down from the seat and strolled towards her owner. Though rather than going directly towards him, she took a slight detour to nudge her nose into Bex's hand. It was a small moment, but one Bex felt was meant to convey that she would have stayed there with her had it not been for the food issue. "Daft animal," Fergus muttered, turning to leave for a second time. "Go on, Ruby, I'll see you tomorrow," Bex said, offering the dog a quick rub behind the ears before she finally headed out after Fergus and the rest of the pack. As the animal disappeared from view, Bex smiled to herself. Even if the old lord was far from affable, at least she had one friend in the castle. Chapter 7. As Bex closed the door, she let out a long sigh before breathing in a lungful of cold, slightly musty air. The entire situation had been completely surreal, and she needed a moment to process it all. One old, bedraggled, and somewhat grumpy man appeared to live in this entire castle by himself. How was that possible? And cleaning 3 days a week? She had a cleaner once a week for her flat because she despised mopping her floors. Mopping a place like this, especially with 5 dogs seeming to have free rein, would be a Herculean task. No, she corrected herself, it would be more like that man who had to roll a boulder up a hill every day, wouldn't it? And speaking of hills, now that she had gathered herself, Bex moved away from the door to the other side of the room, and not for the first time that day, she felt her breath become stolen by the scenery. The view out of the window was utterly sublime. Even Daisy's home, Wildflower Loch, couldn't compete with this. Rolling hills were covered in constantly changing terrain, from forests to rocky outcrops and lush green fields, and there in the middle of it all was a large, glimmering lake. No, a loch, she corrected herself again. She was definitely looking at a loch. Birds dipped and dived across the vista as the evening light reflected off the water. She couldn't draw her eyes away from it. Hopefully, the study would have less of an appealing view, she thought. There was no way she'd be able to focus on work if she kept looking outside at something like this. It was only when she yawned so loudly that her jaw clicked that Bex remembered the reason she had asked Fergus to show her straight up here. She was shattered, and that double bed was calling her name. After shutting the curtains, she crossed the room and let herself flop down. The springs let out a low creak that Bex reciprocated with a satisfied grin of her own. When she'd moved into her flat, she'd bought herself a top-of-the-line memory foam internal spring support mattress, but it didn't feel anywhere near